Joseph Crow Feather stood alone on the small hill behind his grandfather's house. The wind blew hard across the dry Texas land, making the grass bend and dance. In his hands, he held a small bag of tobacco and sage, just like his grandfather had taught him. The old man was gone now, buried 3 days ago in the red earth of their ancestors. The funeral had been hard. Joseph watched as people from the Lipan Apache community came to say goodbye to Samuel Crow Feather. The old man had been 92 years old when he died. He had lived through more pain and loss than most people could imagine. Now Joseph was alone, the last of his family line. Joseph looked down at the fresh grave. The headstone was simple, made of local limestone. It read, Samuel Crow Feather, 1931 to 2023, beloved grandfather, keeper of stories. Joseph touched the stone with his rough hands. Even in death, his grandfather felt present, like his spirit was still watching over the land. The young man closed his eyes and remembered the stories. His grandfather had told him these stories since he was a small boy. Stories about the old days when the Lipan Apache people were free to roam the land from Texas to Mexico. Stories about how the white settlers came and took everything away. Samuel used to sit in his old wooden chair on the porch, smoking his pipe and looking out at the sunset. Listen carefully, Joseph, he would say. You need to know where we come from. You need to understand what they did to us. The stories were always the same, but Joseph never got tired of hearing them. His grandfather would tell him about the great chiefs who fought to protect their people. He would talk about the women who kept the traditions alive even when it was dangerous to do so. He would describe the sacred places that were now covered with cities and highways. But the stories that hurt the most were about the broken promises. The white government made treaties with the Apache people, promising them land and peace. Then they broke every single promise. They took the children away to schools where they were beaten for speaking their own language. They forced the people onto small pieces of bad land where nothing would grow. They wanted to kill the Indian in us, Samuel would say, his old eyes growing dark. They thought if they could make us like them, we would disappear forever. Joseph opened his eyes and looked around at the land. His grandfather had managed to buy back 40 acres of their ancestral territory. It was not much, but it was something. Every tree, every rock, every blade of grass was sacred to their people. This was where his great-great-grandmother had gathered medicine plants. This was where his ancestors had hunted and lived and raised their children. Now it was his responsibility to protect this place. The wind grew stronger, and dark clouds gathered in the sky. Joseph could smell rain coming. He opened the small bag and took out some of the tobacco and sage. He scattered it on the grave just like his grandfather had taught him. I promise you, grandfather, he said out loud, I will not forget who we are. I will not let our bloodline be destroyed. As he spoke these words, Joseph felt something deep inside his chest. It was anger, but also determination. His grandfather had died without seeing his people truly free. He had died knowing that their culture was still in danger of disappearing forever. Joseph thought about his sister Maria, who lived in San Antonio with her white husband. She had 2 children who barely spoke any Apache words. They went to regular schools and ate regular food and lived regular American lives. When they visited their grandfather, they seemed like strangers. This made Joseph angry. How could Maria forget everything their grandfather had taught them? How could she marry someone whose ancestors had tried to destroy their people? How could she raise children who did not know their own heritage? I will never make that mistake, Joseph said to the wind. I will never love someone who does not understand our pain. The first drops of rain began to fall. Joseph did not move. He let the water hit his face and soak through his shirt. Rain was sacred to his people. It brought life to the dry land and washed away the old to make room for the new. But some things should never be washed away, Joseph thought. Some things should be held on to forever. He thought about all the Apache women he had met over the years. There were not many left who truly understood the old ways. Most of them had moved to cities or married outside the tribe. The ones who remained were good women, But Joseph had never felt a strong connection with any of them. Maybe that was better, he thought. Maybe it was easier to be alone than to risk losing what little they had left. The rain was falling harder now. Joseph could hear thunder in the distance. He should go inside, but he was not ready to leave his grandfather yet. He had more to say. "I swear to you on this sacred ground," he said, his voice getting louder to compete with the wind. "I will never fall in love with a white woman. I will never betray our people like others have done. I will keep our bloodline pure and our traditions alive." As he spoke these words, lightning flashed across the sky. For a moment, everything was bright, as day. Joseph could see for miles across the land that his ancestors had loved and died for. He could feel their spirits in the wind and rain. This was his promise, not just to his grandfather, but to all the crow-feather men who had come before him. He would be different from his sister. He would be strong where others had been weak. He would remember where others had forgotten. The storm was getting worse. Joseph finally turned to walk back to the house. But before he left, he placed his hand on the headstone one more time. "I will make you proud, grandfather," he whispered. "I will never let them win." As he walked through the rain toward the small house where he had grown up, Joseph felt the weight of his promise settling into his bones. It felt right and necessary, like armor that would protect him from making the same mistakes others had made. He did not know that in 3 years, this promise would be tested in a way he could never imagine. He did not know that love could strike, like lightning, fast and powerful and impossible to control. All he knew was that he had made a sacred vow, and he intended to keep it forever. The rain washed over the land, but Joseph's promise remained solid as stone. 3 years had passed since Joseph made his promise to his grandfather. The small house on the hill now belonged to him, along with the 40 acres of sacred land. But Joseph had built something new on that land, something his grandfather would have been proud of. Crow Feather Construction had started as just Joseph and his old pickup truck. Now it was a real business with 12 employees and more work than they could handle. Joseph specialized in building houses and buildings that worked with nature instead of fighting against it. He used solar panels and wind power. He built with materials that came from the earth and would return to the earth someday. Most of his work was on tribal land throughout Texas and New Mexico. The Apache communities trusted him because he was one of them. They knew he understood what it meant to build something that would last, something that honored the old ways while embracing the new. Joseph woke up every morning before sunrise, just like his grandfather had taught him. He would walk outside and greet the sun as it came up over the hills. He would say a prayer of thanks for another day to serve his people. Then he would drive to whatever job site needed him most. Today, he was working on a new community center for the Mescalero Apache Reservation in New Mexico. The old building had been damaged in a storm, and the tribe wanted something better. They wanted a place where their children could learn traditional crafts and hear the old stories. They wanted solar power and rainwater collection and walls that would stand for 100 years. Joseph loved this kind of work. Every nail he hammered and every beam he raised felt like he was rebuilding what had been taken away from his people. He was creating spaces where Apache culture could grow strong again. His crew respected him because he worked harder than anyone else. He never asked them to do something he would not do himself. He knew every man's name and every man's family. When someone had troubles at home, Joseph made sure they had time to deal with them. When someone needed extra money, Joseph found a way to give them more hours. But Joseph kept his distance from everyone, even his own workers. He was friendly, but not close. He was fair, but not personal. He ate lunch alone and drove home alone every night. The only person who worried about this was his sister Maria. Maria lived in San Antonio with her husband David and their 2 children. She called Joseph every Sunday night, always asking the same questions. Was he eating enough? Was he sleeping enough? Was he ever going to find a nice woman and settle down? "You cannot live like a monk forever," Maria would say. "Grandfather would want you to be happy." Joseph would change the subject. He would ask about her children or her job or anything else that would stop her from talking about his love life. But Maria never gave up. Last month she had driven all the way from San Antonio to bring him a home-cooked meal and try to set him up with her friend Rosa. Rosa was a nice Apache woman who worked as a teacher. She was pretty and smart and came from a good family. Joseph had been polite but cold. He answered Rosa's questions with yes or no. He did not ask her anything about herself. After an hour, Rosa made an excuse to leave early. Maria was angry. "What is wrong with you?" she had asked after Rosa drove away. "She is perfect for you. She knows our culture. She speaks our language. She wants children. What more do you want?" Joseph had not known how to explain. Rosa was everything he should want in a woman. But when he looked at her, he felt nothing. No spark, no interest, no desire to know her better. It was like looking at a nice painting in a museum. He could appreciate that it was beautiful, but it did not touch his heart. Maybe his heart was broken, Joseph thought. Maybe the anger and pain he carried had damaged something inside him that could not be fixed. He threw himself into his work even harder. When he was building something, when his hands were busy and his mind was focused, he did not have to think about being alone. He did not have to wonder if he would ever feel the kind of love that other people talked about. The community center project was going well. The foundation was poured and the walls were going up. Joseph's crew was proud of their work, and the tribal council was pleased with the progress. In 2 more months, Apache children would be learning traditional dances in a building that used the power of the sun and the wind. Joseph was measuring lumber when his phone rang. It was Maria again, even though it was only Thursday. "I need to talk to you," she said without saying hello. "What is wrong?" Joseph asked. Maria only called early when something bad had happened. "Nothing is wrong, but I have news." "Good news, I think." Joseph waited. "There is a conference next week in Austin about renewable energy and sustainable building. I think you should go." Joseph almost laughed. "Maria, I do not have time for conferences. I have work to do." "This is work," Maria said. "There will be people there who could give you big contracts. Government people, business people, people who care about the environment. You could grow your company." Joseph thought about this. He had been turning down jobs lately because he did not have enough workers. If he could find bigger clients, he could hire more people from the tribal communities. He could create more jobs for Apache families. "I will think about it," he said. "I already registered you," Maria said quickly. "The conference is next Friday and Saturday. I booked you a hotel room. All you have to do is show up." Joseph sighed. His sister never gave up when she had an idea in her head. "Why do you care so much about my business?" he asked. There was a pause. Then Maria said, "Because I care about you. You work all the time, and you never have any fun. Maybe if you go to this conference, you will meet some people, make some friends, maybe even meet a nice woman." Joseph felt his jaw tighten. "I told you, I am not interested in meeting women." "I know what you told me," Maria said. "But I also know you are lying to yourself. You think grandfather would want you to be alone forever? You think he would want the crow feather name to die with you?" This hit Joseph like a punch to the stomach. He had not thought about children, about carrying on the family name. He had been so focused on keeping his promise that he had not considered what would happen if he kept it too well. "I have to go," he said. "We will talk about this later." "Promise me you will go to the conference," Maria said. "Just promise me that." Joseph looked around at his work site. His crew was busy building something good and strong and lasting. Maybe Maria was right. Maybe it was time to think bigger. "I promise," he said. After he hung up, Joseph went back to measuring lumber, but his mind was not on his work anymore. He was thinking about his grandfather's stories, about the importance of keeping the tribe strong and growing. Maybe going to Austin would be good for business. Maybe he would meet people who could help him build more projects for Apache communities. Maybe he could grow his company and hire more tribal members and create something that would last beyond his own lifetime. What he did not expect was that in 1 week, in 1 moment, everything he believed about himself would change forever. He did not expect that a promise made in grief and anger could be shattered in 3 seconds by something as simple as looking into a stranger's eyes. Joseph finished his measurements and went back to work, never suspecting that his life was about to take a turn that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and what it really meant to honor his ancestors. Joseph hated conferences. He hated the crowds, the noise, and the fake smiles. He hated wearing his good clothes instead of his work boots and jeans. Most of all, he hated the small talk that people seemed to love so much. The Austin Convention Center was huge and full of people in business suits. Joseph felt out of place in his dark jacket and tie. His long black hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, but he still felt like everyone was staring at him. He checked his phone for the third time in 10 minutes. It was only 9 in the morning and the conference did not end until 6. It was going to be a long day. Maria had given him a list of people to meet and booths to visit. She had done research on which companies might want to hire Crowfeather Construction. Joseph had to admit his sister was smart about business, even if she was annoying about everything else. He walked through the exhibition hall, looking at displays about solar panels and wind turbines and energy-efficient building materials. Some of the technology was impressive. Some of it was just expensive ways to do things he already knew how to do with simpler methods. At the booth for Southwest Solar Solutions, a salesman in a shiny suit tried to convince Joseph that he needed to buy their premium solar panel system. The man talked fast and used a lot of big words, but Joseph could tell he did not really understand how solar power worked. He was just reading from a script. Joseph listened politely for a few minutes, then took the man's business card and moved on. He was starting to think this whole trip was a waste of time. The morning sessions were about government regulations and tax incentives for renewable energy projects. Joseph sat in the back of the conference room and took notes. But most of the information did not apply to his small company. This was all about big corporations and million-dollar contracts. He was just a guy with a pickup truck and a crew of 12 men. By lunchtime, Joseph was ready to drive home. He had met a few people and collected some business cards, but nothing seemed worth the time and money he was spending here. He decided to stay for one more hour, then head back to New Mexico. The afternoon session was about new technologies for sustainable building. Joseph found an empty seat near the back and listened to presentations about smart glass and self-cooling concrete and walls that could generate their own electricity. It was interesting, but most of it was too expensive for the tribal communities he worked with. When the session ended, Joseph decided to get some coffee before leaving. The conference organizers had set up a coffee station in the hallway outside the meeting rooms. There was a long line, but Joseph was not in a hurry anymore. He finally reached the front of the line and filled a large cup with black coffee. The lady behind the counter smiled and asked if he wanted cream or sugar. Joseph shook his head and turned away from the coffee station. That was when his phone buzzed with a text message. Joseph pulled his phone out of his jacket pocket while walking away from the coffee station. The message was from his crew foreman, Tommy, about a problem with the community center project. A delivery of lumber had been damaged in transport, and they needed Joseph to approve ordering replacement materials right away. Joseph stopped walking and started typing a reply. The lumber company would probably try to blame them for the damage, but Joseph knew how to handle situations like this. He needed to call the supplier and the insurance company and make sure they got the right materials delivered by Monday morning. He was completely focused on his phone, walking slowly while he typed. He did not see the woman coming toward him from the other direction. She was walking fast, carrying a large stack of papers and looking over her shoulder at someone behind her. They collided right in the middle of the hallway. Joseph's coffee went flying, splashing hot liquid across both of them. The woman's papers, scattered everywhere, floating down like snow all around them. Joseph's phone flew out of his hand and skittered across the floor. Oh no, I am so sorry," the woman said, looking down at her soaked blouse and then at Joseph's stained jacket. Joseph looked up to tell her it was okay, that accidents happen. But when their eyes met, something strange happened inside his chest. It felt like the world stopped moving. It felt like someone had reached inside him and grabbed his heart with both hands. The woman had blue eyes. Not just any blue, but the deep blue of a clear sky right before sunset. Her hair was brown with gold highlights, falling in soft waves around her face. She was probably in her early 30s, about his age. She was pretty, but that was not what made Joseph's breath catch in his throat. It was something else, something in the way she looked at him like she was seeing all the way into his soul. Something in the concern on her face that seemed real, not fake like most people at these conferences. Something that made him feel like he had been waiting his whole life for this moment without knowing it. The whole thing lasted maybe 3 seconds. But in those 3 seconds, Joseph felt his carefully built walls start to crack. Then reality came crashing back. The woman was white. Very white. With pale skin and light eyes and that educated way of talking that meant she came from money and privilege. She was exactly the kind of person his grandfather had warned him about. She was exactly the kind of person he had sworn never to love. "I am so sorry," she said again, getting down on her knees to gather her scattered papers. "I was not watching where I was going. My presentation is in 10 minutes and I was trying to review my notes one more time." Joseph shook his head, trying to clear the strange feeling from his mind. "It is okay," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "No harm done." He bent down to help her collect the papers. Their hands touched briefly when they both reached for the same document, and Joseph felt an electric shock run up his arm. The woman looked up at him with those blue eyes, and Joseph saw that she had felt it too. "Thank you," she said softly. "You do not have to help me. I made this mess." Joseph found himself looking at the papers as he handed them to her. They were covered with charts and graphs about wind energy efficiency. The handwriting in the margins was neat and precise, full of technical notes that showed she really understood her subject. "You work with wind power?" he asked, surprising himself by starting a conversation. She nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I am an environmental engineer. I design wind farms for different types of terrain." "What about you?" Joseph hesitated. Usually he was proud to talk about his work, but something about this woman made him nervous. "I build things. Sustainable buildings, mostly for tribal communities." Her eyes lit up with interest. "That is amazing. I would love to hear more about that." Tribal communities are often pioneers in renewable energy, but they do not always get the credit they deserve. Joseph was surprised by her response. Most white people, when they learned he worked on reservations, either looked uncomfortable or started asking awkward questions about casinos and government handouts. This woman seemed genuinely interested. "I should let you get to your presentation," he said, standing up and brushing coffee stains off his jacket. She stood up too, clutching her papers to her chest. "Actually, my presentation is about designing wind farms that work with existing land use patterns instead of disrupting them. If you have time, you might find it interesting. I am Dr. Sarah McKenna, by the way." She held out her hand, and Joseph found himself shaking it before he could think about whether he should. Her grip was firm and confident, but her skin was soft. "Joseph Crowfeather," he said. "Crowfeather," she repeated thoughtfully. "That is a beautiful name. Are you Lipan Apache?" Joseph was shocked that she knew about the Lipan tribe. Most people had never heard of them or confused them with other Apache groups. "Yes," he said. "How did you know?" Sarah smiled, and Joseph felt that strange electricity in his chest again. "I did my doctoral research on land use patterns in West Texas. I learned about the different tribal communities that originally lived there. The Lipan Apache had incredibly sophisticated understanding of sustainable land management." Joseph stared at her. No white person had ever talked to him about his people's history like this. Usually they either knew nothing or they had learned the wrong things from movies and old books. "I really should go," Sarah said, glancing at her watch. "My presentation starts in 5 minutes, but maybe we could talk more later." "I would love to learn about your work." Joseph knew he should say no. He should walk away right now and never see this woman again. But instead he heard himself saying, "What time does your presentation end?" 4:30. Conference room B. "I will try to make it," Joseph said, even though every alarm bell in his head was screaming at him to run. Sarah smiled again, that bright smile that made Joseph's heart race. "I hope you do. And I am really sorry about your jacket." She hurried. away toward the conference rooms, leaving Joseph standing alone in the hallway with coffee stains on his clothes and chaos in his mind. 3 seconds. That was all it had taken to shake the foundation of everything he believed about himself. 3 seconds to make him question a promise he had thought was unbreakable. Joseph picked up his phone from the floor and checked for damage. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. He looked at the unfinished text message to Tommy and tried to remember what he had been typing. Joseph sat in his truck in the parking lot of the Austin Convention Center, staring at his cracked phone screen. He had been there for 20 minutes, trying to decide whether to drive home or go back inside. Dr. Sarah McKenna's presentation had ended 30 minutes ago, but Joseph had not attended it. Instead, he had walked around the parking lot arguing with himself. Everything about this situation was wrong. Sarah was white. She worked for a big corporation. She was exactly what his grandfather had warned him about. Joseph should be driving back to New Mexico right now, forgetting he had ever met her. But he could not stop thinking about the way she had known about the Lipan Apache. Most people had never even heard of his tribe. When they had, they usually got the facts wrong or asked stupid questions. Sarah had talked about his people's land management like she really understood and respected it. And those blue eyes. Joseph had never believed in love at first sight. He had always thought it was something people made up for movies and romance novels. But when he looked into Sarah's eyes, something had changed inside him. Something that scared him more than anything had ever scared him before. His phone rang, making him jump. It was Maria. "How is the conference going?" she asked. Joseph looked at the stains on his jacket. "It is fine. I am learning things." "Have you met any interesting people?" Joseph hesitated. If he told Maria about Sarah, his sister would probably drive to Austin tonight to meet her. If he did not tell her, he would have to lie. Joseph had never been good at lying. "A few people," he said carefully. "Anyone I should know about?" "Just business contacts," Joseph said. It was not exactly a lie, he told himself. Sarah had talked about work. "Well, I am proud of you for going," Maria said. "Maybe next week you can tell me all about it. I have to go now. David is making dinner and the kids need help with homework." After Maria hung up, Joseph sat in his truck for another 10 minutes. Finally, he started the engine and drove back toward New Mexico. But instead of taking the direct route home, he took the long way that would give him time to think. Joseph had always been good at controlling his emotions. When other kids at school made fun of his name or his long hair, he had stayed calm. When contractors tried to cheat him because they thought he was just another dumb Indian, he had handled it professionally. When Maria married David and their children started forgetting their Apache heritage, Joseph had kept his disappointment to himself. But this thing with Sarah was different. He could not control it or ignore it or make it go away. Every time he tried to forget about her, he remembered the way she had said his name or the genuine interest in her voice when she talked about his work. By the time Joseph got home, it was dark. He sat on his grandfather's porch and looked out at the land that had been in his family for generations. Usually, this view calmed him down and helped him remember what was important. Tonight, it just made him feel more confused. Joseph went inside and turned on his computer. He told himself he was just going to check his email and go to bed. But instead, he found himself searching for information about Dr. Sarah McKenna. It did not take long to find her. She had a profile on the website of her company, Meridian Energy Solutions. The photo showed her smiling in a hard hat and safety vest, standing next to a wind turbine. She looked professional and confident and completely out of Joseph's league. Joseph read her biography. She had graduated from Stanford University with a degree in environmental engineering. She had a doctorate from MIT in renewable energy systems. She had designed wind farms in 12 states and 3 countries. She had written articles for scientific journals and spoken at conferences around the world. She was brilliant and accomplished and successful. She was everything Joseph was not. But as Joseph kept reading, he learned other things about Sarah that surprised him. She had volunteered with environmental justice organizations. She had written articles about the importance of including indigenous communities in renewable energy projects. She had donated money to scholarships for Native American students studying engineering. Joseph found a video of a presentation Sarah had given at a conference in Colorado. She was talking about a wind farm project in Montana that had been designed in partnership with the Blackfeet tribe. She spoke with passion about the importance of respecting tribal sovereignty and traditional land management practices. Too often, energy companies see tribal lands as empty space that can be used for whatever they want, Sarah said in the video. But these lands have been carefully managed by indigenous peoples for thousands of years. We have so much to learn from their wisdom. Joseph watched the video 3 times. Each time he was more impressed by Sarah's knowledge and respect for Native American communities. But he was also more frightened by his own feelings. This was not just physical attraction. If it was just about the way Sarah looked, Joseph could have handled it. But she was also smart and passionate and seemed to care about the same things he cared about. She was someone he could actually talk to, someone who might understand his work and his values. That made her dangerous in a way that no woman had ever been dangerous before. Joseph closed his computer and went to bed, but he could not sleep. He kept thinking about his grandfather's stories. Samuel Crow Feather had told him about Apache warriors who had fallen in love with Mexican women, or white women, and had been forced to choose between love and loyalty to their tribe. Love makes you weak, his grandfather had said. It makes you forget who you are and where you come from. The white man knows this. That is why they send their women to seduce our men. That is how they destroy us from the inside. Joseph had always believed these stories. He had seen what happened to Apache men who married outside the tribe. Their children grew up not knowing their heritage. Their families slowly became more white and less Apache with each generation. Eventually, there was nothing left of the original culture. But what if his grandfather was wrong? What if love could make someone stronger instead of weaker? What if the right person could help preserve Apache culture instead of destroying it? Joseph shook his head, angry at himself for even thinking such things. His grandfather had lived through the worst times in Apache history. He had seen their people nearly destroyed by disease and war and government policies designed to eliminate them completely. Samuel Crow Feather knew what he was talking about. Joseph had made a promise and he was going to keep it. The next morning, Joseph threw himself into work. He spent 12 hours at the community center job site, working so hard that his crew started to worry about him. He lifted heavy beams and mixed concrete and hammered nails until his hands were sore and his back was aching. But even exhaustion could not stop him from thinking about Sarah. On Tuesday, she sent him an email. "Dear Joseph," it said, "I hope you do not mind that I got your email address from the conference registration list. I wanted to apologize again for spilling coffee on you. I also wanted to thank you for helping me pick up my papers. Most people would have just walked away." Joseph stared at the email for a long time before continuing to read. "I have been thinking about our conversation," Sarah wrote. "I would love to learn more about your sustainable building projects. Meridian Energy is always looking for partners who understand local communities and environmental challenges. Would you be interested in having a phone conversation about potential collaboration?" Joseph read the email 5 times. It was professional and polite. Sarah was not asking him on a date. She was talking about business. There was nothing wrong with exploring a business relationship, Joseph told himself. It could be good for his company and good for the Apache communities he worked with. But even as he thought this, Joseph knew he was lying to himself. This was not about business. This was about wanting to hear Sarah's voice again. This was about wanting to see those blue eyes and that smile that made his heart race. Joseph spent the rest of the day trying to decide how to respond. He wrote 3 different emails and deleted all of them. Finally, just before bed, he sent a short reply. "Dr. McKenna, thank you for your email. I would be interested in discussing potential collaboration. You can reach me at this number during business hours. Joseph Crow Feather." He hit send before he could change his mind. Sarah called him the next morning at exactly 9 o'clock. "Joseph, thank you so much for getting back to me," she said, and hearing her voice made Joseph's chest tight. "I have been looking at your company website and I am really impressed by your work. The solar installation you did for the Jicarilla, Apache Tribe is exactly the kind of project Meridian wants to support. For the next hour, they talked about wind energy and solar power and sustainable building techniques. Sarah asked intelligent questions about working with tribal governments and understanding traditional land use patterns. Joseph found himself opening up about his work in a way he rarely did with outsiders. "There is actually a project I would love to discuss with you," Sarah said near the end of their conversation. "We are planning a wind farm in West Texas, not far from where you are based. The land is owned by a consortium that includes several tribal communities. We need a construction partner who understands both the technical requirements and the cultural sensitivities involved." Joseph felt his heart start beating faster. Sarah arrived at the reservation on Thursday morning in a white SUV that looked too clean and expensive for the dusty roads. Joseph watched from his office window as she parked next to his pickup truck. Even from a distance, he could see her, checking her appearance in the mirror and smoothing down her hair. Joseph had been awake since 4 in the morning preparing for this meeting. He had changed clothes 3 times, cleaned his office twice, and rehearsed what he was going to say. Nothing felt right. His best shirt was too formal, his work clothes were too casual, and every word he practiced sounded stupid in his head. Now Sarah was walking toward his office, wearing dark jeans and a blue blouse that matched her eyes. She had pulled her hair back in a ponytail and wore minimal makeup. She looked professional but approachable, like someone who was ready to get her hands dirty if necessary. Joseph opened the door before she could knock. "Dr. McKenna," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Welcome to the Mescalero Reservation." "Please call me Sarah," she said, extending her hand. When they shook, Joseph felt that same electric shock he had experienced at the conference. From the slight widening of Sarah's eyes, he could tell she felt it too. "Would you like some coffee?" Joseph asked, stepping back to let her into his office. "That would be great, thank you." Joseph's office was small but organized. The walls were covered with photographs of his construction projects and certificates from tribal councils, thanking Crow Feather Construction for their work. Sarah studied the photos while Joseph poured coffee from the pot he had made fresh that morning. "These projects are incredible," Sarah said, pointing to a photo of a solar installation on a school building. "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" "About 5 years," Joseph said, handing her a mug. "I started the company after my grandfather died. He always talked about the importance of taking care of the land for future generations." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That is such an important perspective. Too many energy projects are designed without thinking about long-term environmental impact." They sat down at Joseph's desk, and Sarah pulled out a folder of documents about the wind farm project. As she explained the technical details, Joseph found himself watching her face more than listening to her words. She spoke with passion about wind patterns and energy efficiency, using her hands to illustrate points and leaning forward when she got excited about a particular aspect of the design. "The site is about 40 miles southwest of here," Sarah said, spreading out a map on Joseph's desk. "The wind conditions are excellent and the terrain is relatively flat. But here is the challenging part." She pointed to several areas on the map that were marked in different colors. "This land is owned by a consortium that includes 3 tribal communities, 2 private ranchers, and the state of New Mexico. Everyone has to agree on the project design and the revenue sharing. It is complicated, but if we can make it work, it could be a model for future projects." Joseph studied the map. He recognized some of the landmarks and knew the area well. It was good land for wind farming, but Sarah was right about the complications. Getting that many different groups to agree on anything would be nearly impossible. "What role would my company play?" Joseph asked. "We need someone to handle all the construction and installation work," Sarah said. "But more than that, we need someone who can serve as a liaison with the tribal communities, someone they trust, someone who understands their concerns and can help address them." Joseph looked up from the map and found Sarah watching him intently. "Why me?" he asked. "There are bigger construction companies with more experience in wind energy." Sarah was quiet for a moment, as if she was deciding how much to tell him. "Because I have been researching your work for the past week," she said finally. "I have talked to people at the Jicarilla Apache tribe and the Navajo Nation. They all say the same thing about you. You do good work, you keep your promises, And you care more about serving the community than making money. Joseph felt heat rise in his cheeks. He was not used to compliments, especially from people like Sarah. Also, Sarah continued, I think you understand something that most people in the energy business do not understand. You know that this is not just about generating electricity. It is about creating economic opportunities for communities that have been excluded from the energy economy for too long. Joseph nodded. That was exactly how he felt about his work, but he had never heard a white person express it so clearly. I would like to see the site, Joseph said, and I would like to meet with the tribal representatives before I commit to anything. Of course, Sarah said. Actually, I was hoping you could introduce me to them. I want to make sure they feel comfortable with Meridian Energy before we move forward. Joseph was impressed by this. Most energy companies tried to negotiate directly with tribal governments, often making promises they could not keep or failing to understand cultural protocols. Sarah seemed to recognize that relationships and trust were more important than contracts. I can arrange meetings, Joseph said. But first, let me show you around. You should see what we have accomplished here before we talk about new projects. They spent the rest of the morning visiting Joseph's completed projects on the reservation. Sarah asked thoughtful questions about everything from foundation design to maintenance schedules. She was particularly interested in how the tribal communities had been involved in planning and decision-making. At the new community center, Sarah met Tommy and several other members of Joseph's crew. She talked to them about their work and their families, showing genuine interest in their lives. Joseph watched his men respond to her warmth and sincerity. By the end of the visit, they were calling her Sarah instead of Dr. McKenna and offering to show her their traditional crafts. Your crew really respects you, Sarah said as they walked back to their vehicles. That says a lot about your leadership. Joseph shrugged. They are good men, they work hard, and they care about their families. That is all I ask. It is more than that, Sarah said. I have worked with a lot of construction crews. Most of them see their boss as someone to avoid or complain about. Your men look at you like you are family. Joseph did not know how to respond to this. He had never thought about his relationship with his crew in those terms, but Sarah was right. These were not just employees. They were members of his community, men he had grown up with and gone to school with and shared traditional ceremonies with. Would you like to have lunch? Joseph asked, surprising himself with the invitation. There is a cafe in town that makes good green chili stew. Sarah smiled, and Joseph felt his heart skip a beat. I would love that. The cafe was small and crowded with local families. Joseph was nervous about bringing Sarah here, worried that she would feel uncomfortable or that people would stare at them. But Sarah seemed completely at ease. She ordered green chili stew and ate it without complaining about the heat, even though Joseph could see tears forming in her eyes. This is delicious, she said, fanning her mouth with her hand. My tolerance for spicy food is not very good, but I love the flavor. Joseph laughed despite himself. Most people from the East Coast cannot handle New Mexican green chili. How? Did you know I was from the East Coast? Sarah asked. Your accent, Joseph said. Also, you said please and thank you to the waitress 4 times. People around here are more informal. Sarah laughed. You are very observant. I grew up in Massachusetts. My family has been there for generations. Joseph felt his chest tighten. Sarah's family had probably been in America for hundreds of years, which meant they had been here during the worst times for Native Americans. They might have been the kind of people his grandfather had told stories about. But as they continued talking, Joseph learned things about Sarah's family that surprised him. Her great-great-grandmother had been a Quaker who had worked with abolitionists to help escaped slaves reach Canada. During the 1880s, when the government was forcing Apache children into boarding schools, the same woman had secretly helped several Apache families hide their children or get them back. I only learned about this recently, Sarah said. I was researching my family history for a genealogy project, and I found some letters and documents in my grandmother's attic. Apparently, my great-great-grandmother believed that the government's treatment of Native Americans was morally wrong. She did what she could to help, even though it was dangerous. Joseph stared at Sarah, trying to process this information. His grandfather had told him stories about the boarding schools, about children who had been stolen from their families and forced to give up their language and culture. But he had never heard about white families who had tried to help. "Why are you telling me this?" Joseph asked. Sarah looked down at her hands. "Because I want you to know that not all white people supported what happened to your people. Some of us have been trying to make things right for a long time. And because I want you to understand why this work is so important to me." Joseph felt something shifting inside his chest, like a wall that had been standing for years was starting to crack. "I spent most of my childhood not knowing anything about this family history," Sarah continued. "I grew up thinking that racism and injustice were things that happened to other people in other places." Joseph could not sleep. It had been 3 weeks since Sarah's visit to the reservation, and they had been working together almost daily on the wind farm project. They talked on the phone every morning and exchanged dozens of emails about technical details, permit applications, and meetings with tribal representatives. The work was going better than Joseph had hoped. Sarah had impressed everyone with her knowledge and respect for tribal customs. She had learned basic greetings in Apache and always asked permission before entering sacred areas. The tribal councils were starting to trust her, which was unusual for outsiders. But Joseph's feelings for Sarah were growing stronger every day, and it was driving him crazy. During their phone calls, Joseph found himself listening more to the sound of Sarah's voice than to her words. When she laughed at something he said, his heart would race like he was a teenager with his first crush. When she sent him emails with technical questions, he would read them 3 or 4 times, looking for hidden meanings that probably were not there. Joseph tried to keep their relationship professional, but it was getting harder. Last week, Sarah had driven down to meet with the Jicarilla Apache Tribal Council. After the meeting, she had suggested dinner at a restaurant in town. Joseph knew he should have said no, but instead he heard himself agreeing. They had talked for 3 hours about everything except work. Sarah told him about growing up in Massachusetts, about her parents who were both college professors, about why she had decided to become an engineer. Joseph found himself sharing stories about his childhood, about learning traditional skills from his grandfather, about his struggles to balance modern life with Apache traditions. When Sarah smiled at him across the table, Joseph felt like he was drowning in those blue eyes. When she reached across to touch his hand while making a point about renewable energy policy, Joseph felt electricity shoot through his whole body. He was falling in love with her, and it terrified him. Joseph tried to talk himself out of his feelings. He reminded himself of his promise to his grandfather. He thought about all the stories of Apache men who had been destroyed by loving white women. He told himself that Sarah was just being friendly, that she probably did not feel the same way about him. But deep down, Joseph knew that Sarah's feelings were changing too. He could see it in the way she looked at him during their meetings. He could hear it in the way her voice got softer when she said his name. He could feel it in the way she found excuses to stand close to him when they were reviewing maps or technical drawings. The situation came to a head on a Thursday evening in late October. Joseph was working late in his office, reviewing contracts for the wind farm project, when his Aunt Elena knocked on the door. Elena was his grandfather's younger sister, now 78 years old, and one of the most respected elders in their community. "Joseph," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "We need to talk." Joseph looked up from his paperwork, immediately alert. Aunt Elena did not make social visits. When she wanted to talk, it was always about something important. "What is it, Aunt Elena?" he asked. "I have been hearing things," she said, her dark eyes studying Joseph's face. "People are talking about you and the white woman who has been coming to the reservation." Joseph felt his stomach clench. "Dr. McKenna is here on business. We are working on the wind farm project together." Elena nodded slowly. "I know about the business, but I also know about the way you look at her, and the way she looks at you." Joseph opened his mouth to deny it, but Elena held up her hand to stop him. "I am old, Joseph, but I am not blind. I have seen many young people fall in love over the years. I know what it looks like. Joseph felt heat rise in his cheeks. If his aunt could see his feelings, then probably everyone else could too. Even if that were true, Joseph said carefully, it would not matter. I made a promise to grandfather. I swore I would never love a white woman. Elena was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the setting sun. Your grandfather was a good man, she said finally. But he was also a man who carried too much pain. That pain made him see enemies everywhere, even where there might have been friends. Joseph stared at his aunt. What do you mean? Elena sighed deeply. There are things about your grandfather that he never told you. Things he was ashamed of. Joseph felt a chill run down his spine. What things? When Samuel was a young man about your age, he fell in love with a Mexican woman named Esperanza. She was beautiful and kind, and she loved him back. But when the tribal elders found out, they told him he had to choose between her and his people. Joseph had never heard this story before. His grandfather had never mentioned any woman except his grandmother, who had died when Joseph was very young. What did he do? Joseph asked. He chose his people, Elena said. He sent Esperanza away and married your grandmother instead. Your grandmother was a good woman and Samuel cared for her, but he never stopped loving Esperanza. Elena looked directly at Joseph, her eyes full of sadness. Your grandfather spent the rest of his life regretting that choice. He told me many times that he wished he had been brave enough to follow his heart. He said that love was too precious to sacrifice for pride. Joseph felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Everything he thought he knew about his grandfather was changing. But he told me stories, Joseph said weakly, about Apache, men who were destroyed by loving outside the tribe. Those stories were true, Elena said, but they were not the whole truth. Your grandfather only told you about the relationships that ended badly. He never told you about the ones that brought strength to our people. Elena reached across the desk and took Joseph's hand in her weathered ones. Before he died, Samuel told me something. He said that his greatest fear was that you would make the same mistake he made. He said he hoped you would be braver than he was. Joseph stared at his aunt, trying to process what she was telling him. He wanted me to be happy? Joseph asked. He wanted you to live, Elena said. Not just survive, but truly live. He said that too much of our people's energy has been spent on hate and fear. He wanted you to find love and build something beautiful with it. Joseph felt tears burning his eyes. The promise he had made at his grandfather's grave, the oath that had shaped his life for 3 years, had been based on a misunderstanding. But what about keeping our bloodline pure? Joseph asked. What about preserving our culture? Elena smiled sadly. Culture is not preserved by keeping people out, Joseph. It is preserved by living it fully and sharing it with others who respect it. Your grandfather understood this before he died, but he was too proud to tell you directly. Joseph sat in silence for several minutes, trying to absorb what his aunt had told him. Everything he believed about duty and loyalty and keeping promises was being turned upside down. The white woman, Elena said gently. Does she respect our ways? Joseph nodded. She knows more about Apache history than most Apache people do. She talks about our land management practices like they are something to admire, not something primitive. She asks permission before going anywhere sacred. She is trying to create opportunities for our people, not exploit us. And you love her? Joseph closed his eyes. He had been fighting this feeling for weeks, but he could not deny it anymore. Yes, he whispered. I love her. Then what are you waiting for? Elena asked. Joseph looked at his aunt, this wise woman who had lived through more changes and challenges than he could imagine. I am scared, he admitted. What if I am making a mistake? What if I hurt our people by choosing love over loyalty? Elena stood up and walked around the desk to put her hands on Joseph's shoulders. Love is not the opposite of loyalty, Joseph. Sometimes love is the highest form of loyalty there is. After Elena left, Joseph sat alone in his office as darkness fell over the reservation. His phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. Finished reviewing the environmental impact report? Looks great. Can we talk tomorrow morning? I have an idea about the revenue sharing structure that I think the tribal councils will love. Joseph stared at the message for a long time. Sarah was working late too, probably in her hotel room in town, thinking about ways to make this project better for his people. She cared about the success of this wind farm almost as much as he did, but there was something else in her message, something between the lines that made Joseph's heart ache. When Sarah talked about revenue sharing and environmental impact, she was really talking about the future. She was talking about building something together that would last for years. Joseph started typing a response, then deleted it. He started again, then deleted that too. Finally, he just turned off his phone and drove home. But that night, lying in bed in the house where his grandfather had raised him, Joseph made a decision. He was going to tell Sarah how he felt about her. He was going to risk everything on, the chance that love could be stronger than fear. The next morning, Joseph called Sarah and asked her to meet him at the wind farm site. Not in his office or a restaurant, but out on the land where they were planning to build something together. Sarah arrived at noon, wearing jeans and hiking boots and carrying a water bottle. Joseph was waiting for her next to his truck, nervous and excited and terrified all at the same time. This is beautiful land. Joseph felt like he was living in two different worlds. During the day, he worked on the wind farm project with Sarah, and everything felt right. They moved together like partners who had been working together for years. Sarah understood his ideas before he finished explaining them. When she suggested changes to the construction timeline or the equipment layout, Joseph could see immediately why her ideas were better. The tribal councils were impressed with their collaboration. The project was moving forward faster than anyone had expected, and the revenue-sharing agreements were more favorable to the tribal communities than anyone had dared to hope. But at night, when Joseph was alone in his grandfather's house, he was tormented by doubt. He had broken his sacred promise. He had fallen in love with a white woman, exactly what he had sworn never to do. Even though Aunt Elena had told him that his grandfather would have approved, Joseph could not shake the feeling that he was betraying everything he had been taught about loyalty and duty. The internal conflict was tearing him apart. Some days he felt like the happiest man alive. Other days he felt like a traitor to his own people. Joseph tried to hide his confusion from Sarah, but she was too smart not to notice. After a week of watching him struggle, she confronted him. "What is wrong?" she asked. They were sitting in Joseph's truck at the construction site, eating lunch and reviewing the afternoon work schedule. "You seem like you're fighting yourself about something." Joseph looked out at the wind turbine foundations that his crew was pouring. In a few months, this empty land would be generating clean energy for thousands of homes. It was exactly the kind of project his grandfather would have been proud of. "I am fine," Joseph said, but his voice sounded unconvincing even to himself. Sarah reached over and took his hand. "Joseph, talk to me. We are supposed to be partners now, remember? That means you do not have to carry everything by yourself anymore." Joseph looked at Sarah's face and saw so much love and concern that it almost broke his heart. How could loving someone this good be wrong? "I made a promise to my grandfather," Joseph said finally. "A promise that I would never fall in love with a white woman. And now I have broken that promise." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, absorbing what Joseph had told her. "Do you regret breaking it?" she asked softly. Joseph turned to look at her. "No. Yes. I do not know. I love you more than I have ever loved anyone. But I also feel like I am betraying my ancestors." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Can I tell you something my grandmother used to say?" Joseph nodded. "She used to say that the best way to honor the dead is to live fully. Not to repeat their mistakes, but to learn from them and choose differently." Joseph had heard similar wisdom from Apache elders, but hearing it from Sarah made it sound different somehow. "Your grandfather lived in a time when there were very clear lines between us and them," Sarah continued, "when survival meant protecting your people from outsiders at all costs. But maybe our generation can afford to see things differently." Joseph wanted to believe her, but the voices in his head were too loud. The stories his grandfather had told him. The warnings about white people destroying Apache culture from the inside. The fear that love would make him weak and forgetful of his duties. "I need some time to think," Joseph said. "About us? About this whole situation?" Joseph saw hurt flash across Sarah's face, but she nodded. "I understand. This is complicated for both of us." That weekend, Joseph drove up into the mountains alone. He went to a place his grandfather had taken him many times. A high meadow where Apache warriors had gone to fast and pray when they needed guidance from the spirits. Joseph brought traditional offerings of tobacco and sage. He built a small fire and sat facing the east, just like his grandfather had taught him. Then he began the ceremony his people had used for generations when they needed to make difficult decisions. For 3 days, Joseph ate nothing and drank only water. He prayed to his ancestors and asked for their wisdom. He let his mind go quiet so that he could hear the voices of the spirits. On the second night, as Joseph sat by his fire under a sky full of stars, he began to have visions. He saw his great-great-grandfather, a war chief who had fought against the U.S. Army to protect his people's homeland. But in the vision, the chief was not fighting. He was sitting around a campfire with a group of people that included Mexicans, whites, and other tribes. They were all working together to solve a problem that affected everyone. Sometimes the strongest warriors are the ones who know when to put down their weapons, the chief said to Joseph in the vision. Sometimes peace requires more courage than war. On the third night, Joseph saw his grandfather as a young man. Samuel was standing in the same meadow where Joseph now sat, crying, over a letter. In the vision, Joseph could see that the letter was from Esperanza, the Mexican woman Elena had told him about. She was writing to tell Samuel that she was getting married to someone else because she could not wait for him anymore. "I chose fear over love," the young Samuel said to Joseph in the vision. "I chose the opinions of others over the wisdom of my own heart. Do not make the same mistake I made." When Joseph woke up on the fourth morning, he felt different. The confusion and conflict that had been tearing him apart were gone. In their place was a clear understanding of what he needed to do. Joseph drove back to the reservation and went straight to his grandfather's grave. He knelt on the ground where he had made his original promise 3 years ago and spoke out loud to the spirit of Samuel Crow Feather. "Grandfather, I understand now what you were trying to teach me with your stories. You were not telling me to hate white people. You were telling me to be careful, to choose wisely, to protect what is precious. About our culture." Joseph placed fresh tobacco on the grave. "I have chosen wisely, grandfather. I have found a woman who respects our ways and wants to help our people. I have found someone who makes me stronger, not weaker. I think you would like her if you could. Meet her." Joseph felt a warm wind blow across the hilltop, even though the day was calm and still. "I am going to love her, grandfather. I am going to build a life with her that honors both of our cultures. I am going to show the world that love can be a bridge instead of a wall." When Joseph stood up from his grandfather's grave, he felt lighter than he had in months. The burden of guilt and confusion was gone, replaced by certainty and peace. Joseph drove to the hotel in town where Sarah was staying. He had not called her since their conversation in the truck, and he was afraid she might have given up on him. But when she opened her hotel room door and saw him standing there, her face lit up with relief and joy. "I was starting to think I had lost you," she said. "You will never lose me," Joseph said, taking her hands in his. "I am sorry I needed time to figure things out. But I know now what I want." "What do you want?" Sarah asked, looking into his eyes. "I want to build a life with you," Joseph said. "I want to finish this wind farm project together. I want to introduce you to my whole family as the woman I love. I want to show you all the sacred places on our land and teach you the stories my grandfather taught me." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? Really sure?" Joseph pulled her close and held her tight. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." That night they talked until sunrise about their future together. Sarah told Joseph about a scholarship fund she wanted to start for Native American students studying engineering. Joseph told Sarah about his dream of expanding crow feather construction. to serve tribal communities throughout the Southwest. They talked about the challenges they would face. Some people in both of their communities would not understand their relationship. Some would see it as a betrayal of racial loyalty. But they also talked about the opportunities their love could create, the bridges it could build between different cultures. My great-great-grandmother helped Apache families during the worst times, Sarah said. Maybe this is my chance to continue that work in a different way. Joseph thought about his vision of the war chief sitting around the fire with people from many different backgrounds. Maybe this is how we honor our ancestors, he said. Not by repeating their conflicts, but by healing them. As the sun came up over the mountains, Joseph and Sarah made their own promises to each other. Not promises born from fear and anger, but promises based on love and hope for the future. Joseph had finally made the choice that would define the rest of his life. He had chosen love over fear, healing over hatred, building bridges over building walls. It was the bravest thing he had ever done. 6 months later, Joseph stood on the same hilltop where he had made his original promise to his grandfather. But today was different. Today he was not alone, and he was not making a promise born from grief and anger. The wind farm project was finally complete. 57 white turbines turned slowly in the desert wind, generating enough clean energy to power 12,000 homes. The project had brought jobs to 3 tribal communities and would provide steady income for decades to come. More importantly, it had brought Joseph and Sarah together in a way that proved love could strengthen culture instead of destroying it. The celebration ceremony was about to begin. Representatives from all 3 tribal communities were here, along with officials from Meridian Energy and workers from Crowfeather Construction. Sarah had insisted that the ceremony follow traditional Apache protocols, with blessings from tribal elders and offerings to the spirits of the land. Joseph wore his best traditional outfit, a shirt decorated with turquoise and silver that had belonged to his grandfather. Sarah wore a simple blue dress and a necklace of Apache beadwork that Aunt Elena had made for her. They stood together at the front of the gathering, hands joined, ready to speak to their communities about what this project meant. 5 years ago, my grandfather died on this hill, Joseph began, his voice carrying across the crowd. He spent his whole life fighting to protect our people and our land. He taught me that we must never forget who we are or where we come from. Joseph looked out at the faces in the crowd. He saw his crew members, men who had worked with him for years to build sustainable projects on tribal lands. He saw tribal council members who had trusted him with important decisions. He saw Sarah's colleagues from Meridian Energy, people who had learned to respect Apache traditions because Sarah had taught them to. Today, we are celebrating more than just a wind farm, Joseph continued. We are celebrating the idea that we can honor our ancestors while building something new. We can stay true to our values while working with others who share those values. Joseph squeezed Sarah's hand, and she stepped forward to speak. When I first came to this reservation, I was just an engineer with a business proposal, Sarah said. I thought I understood what this project was about. But Joseph and his community taught me that this was never just about generating electricity. This was about healing, about creating opportunities, about building bridges between different worlds. Sarah looked directly at Joseph, and he saw love and gratitude shining in her blue eyes. The Apache people have been protecting this land for thousands of years, she said. Today, these wind turbines will help protect the whole planet. That is the kind of vision that happens when different cultures work together with respect and trust. The crowd murmured approval. Joseph could see that Sarah's words had touched people. Over the past 6 months, she had earned the respect of the tribal communities not just with her technical knowledge, but with her genuine commitment to understanding and honoring Apache culture. Aunt Elena stood up to offer the traditional blessing. At 78, she moved slowly, but her voice was strong and clear as she spoke in Apache, asking the spirits to bless this union of old wisdom and new technology. These machines will turn with the wind that our ancestors breathed, she said, switching to English so everyone could understand. They will generate power from the same forces that have sustained our people for generations. This is how we honor the past while building the future. After the ceremony, as people gathered around tables loaded with traditional foods, Joseph and Sarah walked among the wind turbines. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the desert, and the sound of the turning blades was like a gentle song. "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, stopping next to one of the massive turbines. Joseph looked around at the scene. His crew was talking and laughing with Sarah's colleagues from Meridian Energy. Children from the tribal communities were running between the turbines, their voices echoing in the open space. Elders sat in folding chairs telling stories and watching the celebration with satisfied smiles. "I am happy," Joseph said. "But more than that, I am proud. Proud of what we built together." Sarah smiled and leaned against him. "We make a good team." Joseph thought about how much had changed since that day at the conference when they had collided in the hallway. Sarah had not just become his business partner and the woman he loved. She had become part of his community, part of his family, part of his vision for the future. Over the past 6 months, Sarah had moved to New Mexico permanently. She had bought a small house in town but spent most of her time on the reservation. She was learning to speak Apache from Aunt Elena and had started attending traditional ceremonies. She was working with Joseph to develop new renewable energy projects for tribal communities throughout the Southwest. Most importantly, she had started the scholarship fund she had dreamed about. The Sarah McKenna Foundation for Indigenous Engineers had already provided full college scholarships to 5 Native American students. Sarah was using her connections in the energy industry to create internship opportunities and job placements for young Native engineers. "I have something I want to show you," Joseph said, pulling a small object from his pocket. It was a ring, not a diamond engagement ring like white couples usually exchanged, but a traditional Apache wedding ring made of silver and turquoise. Joseph had spent months learning to make it from an elder who specialized in traditional jewelry. Sarah gasped when she saw it. "Joseph, it is beautiful. My great-grandfather made one like this for my great-grandmother," Joseph said. "It is a symbol of 2 lives becoming one while still honoring the traditions that shaped them." Joseph took Sarah's hand and looked into her eyes. "Sarah McKenna, will you marry me? Will you help me build a family that honors both of our heritages? Will you be my partner in everything, not just business?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes to everything." As Joseph slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger, he felt the presence of his ancestors around them. Not the angry, fearful presence he had imagined for so many years, but a warm, approving presence that blessed their union. "I want to make a new promise," Joseph said, still holding Sarah's hands. "Not to my grandfather's grave this time, but to you and to our future." Joseph looked out at the wind turbines, symbols of how traditional knowledge and modern technology could work together to create something beautiful and sustainable. "I promise to love you in a way that makes both of our cultures stronger," he said. "I promise to raise our children to be proud of their Apache heritage and their European heritage. I promise to build a life with you that proves love can heal old wounds instead of opening new ones." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. "I promise the same things. I promise to spend my life learning about your culture and helping to preserve it. I promise to use my privilege and my education to create opportunities for your people. I promise to love you and honor you and work beside you for as long as I live." As they kissed, the wind picked up, making the turbines turn faster. The sound was like music, like the earth itself was celebrating their union. That evening, as the celebration wound down and people began to head home, Joseph and Sarah sat together on the hood of his pickup truck, looking out at the lights of the wind farm stretching across the desert. "Do you think your grandfather would be proud?" Sarah asked. Joseph thought about his vision quest, about the wisdom he had received from his ancestors, about Aunt Elena's stories of Samuel's regrets. "I think he would be amazed," Joseph said. "I think he would be proud that I found the courage he never had." Joseph pointed to the wind turbines, their lights blinking slowly in the darkness. He spent his whole life thinking that love was the enemy of loyalty. But look what we built together. Look how much stronger our community is because you are part of it. Sarah leaned her head against Joseph's shoulder. "I never imagined I could love someone this much. I never imagined I could feel so connected to a place and a people that were not originally mine." "You are Apache now," Joseph said. "Maybe not by blood, but by choice." by commitment, by the love you have shown to our people. Joseph thought about the future they were planning together. They would expand Crow Feather Construction into a major player in renewable energy development throughout Indian country. They would have children who would grow up bilingual and bicultural, equally comfortable in both worlds. They would create a model for how love could build bridges between communities instead of walls. "We are going to change things," Joseph said. "Our children will grow up in a world where love between different cultures is not seen as betrayal, but as strength." Sarah nodded. "They will know that their Apache ancestors were brilliant land managers, and their European ancestors were people who tried to make amends for historical wrongs. They will be proud of all of their heritage." As they sat together under the stars, surrounded by the gentle whir of wind turbines generating clean energy for thousands of homes, Joseph felt complete in a way he had never felt before. He had kept his promise to his grandfather, just not in the way he had originally intended. He had honored his ancestors by choosing love over fear, by building bridges instead of walls, by proving that the strongest traditions are the ones